The man on horseback slowed when he saw her still sitting on the frozen platform long after the last train had gone. So why hadn't she left? And what was she holding on to that was worth risking the night? The wind cut across the empty station, snapping a loose board against the wall as she tightened her grip on the worn leather bag at her side. Snow had begun to gather at her boots, but she didn't brush it away. Inside the depot, a clerk watched from behind the glass, then turned the lantern down and walked out without a word. When the sound of hooves stopped just beyond the steps, she didn't look up right away. She only rose when the man's shadow fell across the boards, steady, waiting, not reaching. He studied the tracks, then her, as if deciding something that couldn't be undone once spoken. If you had been in her place, would you have stood or walked away? The wind came down from the mountains like it had something to settle. It rattled the loose boards along the Redstone Pass depot and pushed snow through every crack it could find. By sundown, the platform had disappeared under a hard white drift, and the last train had already gone east, its smoke swallowed by the storm. Clara Whitfield sat on the bench beneath the overhang, her back straight even as the cold worked its way through her coat. The wood beneath her had long since lost any warmth. Her gloved hands rested over a worn leather bag at her side. The clasp was cracked. One corner had been stitched twice. She had not moved since the train left. Inside the depot, the ticket window was closed. A lantern burned low behind the glass, more out of habit than purpose. The clerk had locked up early. He had looked at her once before leaving, like he might say something. Then he'd thought better of it and pulled his coat tight around his neck. Across the street, the general store door opened and shut in quick bursts as men stepped out to judge the storm. Each time their eyes slid toward the depot, toward her, then away. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even dislike. It was calculation. A woman alone in a storm was trouble. A stranger more so. Folks in Redstone Pass knew better than to invite trouble inside their own walls, especially in winter when supplies ran thin and roads closed without warning. Clara didn't blame them. She drew in a breath. It burned her throat. Her lips were dry enough to split if she spoke too quickly. She lifted her hand and pressed her scarf closer to her mouth, then let it fall again. Her bag shifted when she moved. The metal inside gave a soft, familiar sound. She rested her palm on it. Still there. That was enough. Time passed without shape. The sky sank into a flat gray, then into something darker. Snow kept falling, steady and quiet, as if the world had decided to forget the place entirely. Then came the sound. Not close. Not yet. A slow, heavy rhythm under the wind. Hooves. Clara lifted her head. The motion cost her more than it should have. For a moment the world tilted, then steadied again. She narrowed her eyes toward the road. Through the blowing snow, a shape took form. Horse first, then rider. The horse moved like it knew the ground even when it couldn't see it. The man on its back sat deep in the saddle, shoulders squared against the wind, long coat snapping behind him. He didn't rush. He came straight toward the depot as if he had already decided where he was going long before he saw her. The horse stopped at the bottom of the platform. Snow gathered along its flanks. Its breath came out in thick clouds. The man dismounted in one clean motion. His boots hit the ground heavy, solid. He took a moment to tie the reins to the post, fingers steady despite the cold. Only then did he look up. Even from where she sat, Clara could see the size of him. Not exaggerated, not strange, just more than most men. Broad through the shoulders, tall enough that the depot roofline seemed lower behind him. She had seen men like that before. Dock workers along the river. Railroad men. They moved carefully in tight spaces. This one moved the same way. He climbed the steps, each board answering under his weight. When he reached the top, he stopped a few feet away. Not too close. Snow clung to the brim of his hat. A line of frost had formed along the edge of his collar. His face was shadowed, but his eyes were clear enough to read. He looked at her, then at the bag, then back at her again. Not curious, measuring. "You waiting on something?" he asked. His voice carried low, steady. It didn't fight the wind. It went through it. Clara swallowed once before answering. "Morning train." He glanced down the empty tracks, already buried in white. "Ain't coming," he said. She knew that, had known it the moment the last whistle faded hours ago. Still, she gave a small nod, as if acknowledging something official. The wind shifted, pushing a harder gust across the platform. Snow swept in under the overhang, catching at the hem of her dress. The man watched it for a moment. Then he stepped forward, just enough to block part of the draft. He didn't comment on it. He didn't offer anything yet. He just stood there, letting the silence settle. Clara felt it. The space between them. Not empty, just held. After a moment, he spoke again. "You stay here," he said. "You won't make it through the night." No urgency, no force, just a statement laid down like fact. Clara's fingers tightened slightly over the handle of her bag. The leather creaked under the pressure. She looked past him, out toward the street. The store was dark now, the windows black, no movement anywhere. Then she looked back at him. "Where would I go?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped briefly to her shoes, damp at the edges, then to the thin line of her coat, where the wind had worked its way through. Finally, he jerked his chin toward the road behind him. "North Ridge," he said. "Got a place there." He left it at that. No promise. No explanation. The horse shifted below, stamping once in the snow. Clara let the silence stretch. She could feel the cold working deeper now, slower, heavier, the kind that didn't sting anymore. She pushed her hands against the bench and stood. It took effort. More than she let show. When she steadied, she reached down and picked up her bag. The strap settled against her shoulder, familiar weight pulling her slightly to one side. She didn't look at him when she stepped forward, just moved. When she reached the edge of the platform, she paused long enough to find her footing on the steps. The wood was slick. She went down carefully. The man was already there when she reached the bottom. He didn't offer a hand. He just watched to make sure she made it down. When she did, he turned toward the horse and loosened the reins. "Name's Gideon Hale," he said, almost as an afterthought. Clara adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "Clara Whitfield." He nodded once, as if that was all he needed. Then he stepped aside, giving her room to move past him toward the road. She hesitated for half a breath, just enough to feel it. The weight of what she was leaving behind. The platform. The empty tracks. The place where no one had asked her to stay. Then she walked forward. Gideon fell in beside her. Not close, not far. The horse followed behind, quiet in the snow. The storm swallowed the depot within a few steps. Neither of them looked back. The road north was barely a road at all. Just a line Gideon seemed to know by memory. Snow covered everything else. Fence posts, low brush, even the shallow ditch that ran alongside the trail. The horse followed steady behind them, its hooves breaking through the crust with a dull, regular sound. Clara kept her eyes on the ground ahead. Not far, just enough to place each step. The wind pushed at her side. Once it caught her off balance. She didn't fall. Before she could correct herself, Gideon's hand moved, then stopped short, hovering near her elbow before dropping back to his side. He said nothing. They walked like that for a long while. At some point, the land shifted. The wind didn't ease, but it broke around something unseen. A rise in the terrain, a line of trees. The air felt different, less exposed. Lights came into view first, low and scattered. Then the shape of buildings behind them. Hale Ridge, Gideon said. No pride in it, just fact. A gate stood open, one hinge creaking in the wind. Beyond it, the yard was packed down by use. Snow had been pushed aside in rough paths leading to the main house, the barn, and a row of smaller structures set back near the edge of the property. A man stepped out from the barn as they approached. He paused when he saw Clara, then looked at Gideon. You were late, he said. Road wasn't clear, Gideon answered. The man nodded once. His gaze flicked to Clara again, then away just as quickly. No questions. Clara noticed that. Gideon led her past the main house without stopping. The windows there were lit, shadows moving behind curtains. Voices carried faintly through the wood. Laughter, low and easy. He didn't turn toward it. Instead, he headed for a smaller cabin set off to the side. Smoke curled from its chimney, thin but steady. He pushed the door open and stepped inside first. Clara followed. Warmth met her in a quiet wave. Not strong, but enough to feel. The room was simple. A narrow bed against one wall, a table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove in the corner, a pot sitting on top, lid tilted just enough to let steam slip out, a stack of split wood by the door, a basin with a folded cloth beside it. Nothing extra. Everything in its place. Gideon moved to the stove and lifted the lid. He checked the water, then set it back without comment. You can use this, he said. Clara set her bag down on the table. The leather made a soft, worn sound against the wood. She looked around once more, took in the details, the clean floor, the patched curtain over the window, the boots left by the door, smaller than Gideon's, older, but cared for. Whose place was this? She asked. He paused, just for a moment. Empty now, he said. She didn't press. He crossed the room and set another log into the stove. The fire caught slowly, then steadied. There's food in the pot, he added. Coffee tins on the shelf. Clara nodded. He stepped back toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. He glanced at her bag, then at her hands. You'll want to warm those, chopped down, he said. It wasn't advice, it was observation. I will, she said. He gave a small nod and stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. The latch settled with a soft click. Clara stood still for a moment. Then she moved. She took off her gloves first. Her fingers were stiff, the skin pale where the cold had worked deepest. She held them near the stove, not too close. Let the heat come back slow. Next came her coat. She hung it by the door, careful not to let it touch the floor. The room filled with quiet again. She lifted the lid on the pot. Beans, a bit of salt pork, nothing fancy. She found a tin cup on the shelf, poured a little, and sat at the table. The first bite was hot enough to make her pause. She waited, then tried again. It settled something in her chest she hadn't noticed was tight. Outside, footsteps passed once, then again. Voices low, never stopping at her door. No one knocked. No one asked. She ate until the cup was empty, then set it aside. She reached for her bag and opened it, checking each item by touch. Cloth rolls, small glass vials, scissors wrapped in linen, all still there. She closed it again and rested her hand on top. A sound cut through the quiet. A shout. Sharp. Close. Then another. Clara was on her feet before she realized she'd moved. She crossed the room and opened the door. Cold rushed in, but she barely felt it. In the yard, Two men were half carrying, half dragging a third toward the barn. The injured man's boot left a broken line in the snow behind him. His leg bent wrong at the knee. The horse that had thrown him was still tied off nearby, head tossing, breath wild. "Get him inside," someone called. "Where?" another answered. Clara stepped down from the porch. "Table," she said. No one listened. She moved closer, her voice cutting through the noise this time. "Lay him on a flat surface, not the ground." The men hesitated. One of them looked toward the main house, then toward the yard. Gideon was already walking in. He didn't hurry. He took in the scene once. The man, the leg, the blood soaking through thick wool. Then he looked at Clara. She held his gaze. "Inside," she said. A beat passed. Gideon turned to the others. "Do what she says." That was enough. They moved. The barn door swung open. Light spilled out across the snow. The man groaned once as they carried him in. Clara followed, already pulling the tie from her sleeve, rolling it back to free her hands. Behind her, Gideon closed the distance in 2 long strides. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Inside the barn, the air was warmer, thick with the smell of hay and leather. A long wooden table stood against the far wall, cluttered with tools and tack. Clara set her bag down on it and opened it. "Boil water," she said. "Clean cloth if you have it, and someone hold that lantern steady." This time no one questioned her. Not after the way Gideon had said it. Not after the way she had stepped forward without waiting. The storm outside kept moving. Inside, something else had started. The barn held its breath. Clara worked with her sleeves rolled past her wrists, her hands steady even as the lantern light flickered. The young man on the table, Ethan Cole, someone had called him, gripped the edge of the wood until his knuckles turned pale beneath the grime. "Keep him still," Clara said, not looking up. 2 men leaned in, one at the shoulders, one at the hips. The third held the lantern close, though his hand trembled enough to make the light sway. Clara adjusted the position of Ethan's leg with careful pressure. Not fast, not slow, just enough. Ethan let out a tight sound through his teeth. "You'll want to breathe," she said quietly. "Helps more than fighting it." He nodded once, tried to follow. Gideon stood off to the side, not in the way, not far enough to be gone. His eyes stayed on Clara's hands, tracking every motion like he was learning something he couldn't name. "Boiling water?" someone said behind him. "Set it there," Clara answered. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. Time stretched thin inside that space. The storm pressed at the walls, but it felt distant now, like something happening to another place. Clara finished what she could, wrapped the leg with clean cloth, then stepped back just enough to look at her work. "He'll need rest," she said, "and someone to keep watch through the night. If the fever rises, wake me." No one argued. Ethan's breathing slowed. His grip on the table loosened. One of the men let out a breath he'd been holding too long. Gideon stepped forward then. Just once. He looked down at Ethan, then at Clara. "That enough?" he asked. "For now," she said. He nodded. That was all. The men carried Ethan out, slower this time, careful. The barn emptied in pieces, boots on wood, the scrape of a door, wind rushing in, then cut off again. Clara stayed behind a moment longer. She wiped her hands with a cloth from her bag, then repacked each item the same way she had unpacked it. No wasted motion. When she stepped outside, the yard had settled. The storm had eased just enough to let the night show through. A thin break in the clouds revealed a stretch of stars, sharp and cold above the ridge. Gideon was there, near the fence line. He hadn't gone back to the house. He didn't turn when she approached, just shifted slightly, enough to let her stand beside him without crowding her. "Leg will hold," she said after a moment. I figured, he answered. Silence again. From the barn, a low murmur of voices carried out. Someone laughing, quiet, like they weren't sure it was allowed. Clara followed the sound with her eyes, then looked back at the yard. You always let strangers give orders? She asked. Gideon's mouth moved once. Not quite a smile. No. She waited. He turned then, just enough to meet her gaze. You weren't guessing, he said. It wasn't praise. It was recognition. Clara looked away first, not out of discomfort, just to let the moment pass. The wind shifted again, lighter now. It carried the smell of wood smoke from the main house. You should get some rest, Gideon said. You too. He didn't answer that. Clara turned back toward the cabin. Her steps were slower this time. Not from the cold, from the weight settling into her limbs now that the work was done. Inside, the fire had burned low. She added another piece of wood, watched the flame catch, then sat at the table. Her bag rested where she'd left it. She didn't open it. Instead, she poured herself a cup of coffee. It had gone bitter on the stove, but it was hot. That was enough. She held the cup in both hands and let the warmth work back into her fingers. Outside, a door closed somewhere across the yard. Then quiet. Morning came without hurry. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the world flattened and white. The sky was clear, pale blue over the ridge. Smoke rose straight from the chimneys, no wind to bend it. Clara stepped out onto the porch, her coat pulled tight, and looked across the ranch. Men moved already, feeding horses, clearing paths, checking fences where the snow had drifted too deep. Work didn't stop. Ethan's voice carried faintly from one of the bunkhouses. Awake. Alive. Clara took that in, then turned back toward her door. She stopped when she noticed the step. Yesterday, it had been loose. The board shifted under her weight when she first came in. Now it held firm. She tested it once with her foot. Solid. No one had said anything about it. She didn't ask. Inside, she set her cup down and went to her bag. This time she opened it, took out a small roll of cloth, a pair of scissors, a glass vial. She looked around the room, the table, the light from the window, the space near the stove. Not much, but enough. Outside, footsteps approached, slow, measured. A knock came. Once. Clara looked up. Come in, she said. The door opened just enough for Gideon to step through. He held something in his hand, a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. He set it on the table without explanation. From the supply run, he said. Inventory list. Clara glanced at it, then back at him. I didn't ask for it. No, he said, but you're going to need things. She studied his face, tried to read what sat behind the words. There wasn't much there to read, just intention. She reached out and unfolded the paper. Salt, flour, nails, lamp oil. At the bottom, blank space. She looked up again. Gideon had already stepped back toward the door. You heading out? She asked. He paused. For a bit? Clara nodded once. He didn't wait for more. The door closed behind him, leaving the room quiet again. Clara stood there with the paper in her hand. Then she picked up a piece of charcoal from the stove's edge and added to the list. Bandages, alcohol, thread. She set the paper back down. Outside, the ranch moved the same as it had the day before. But something had shifted. Not in the land, in where she stood within it. And for the first time since she stepped off that train, Clara didn't feel like she was passing through. She felt placed. It lasted 3 days, long enough for the snow to settle into the ground and turn to a hard crust under boot heels, long enough for the paths between the buildings to stay clear, for the rhythm of the ranch to fold around her without question. Clara kept to her work. Mornings in the small room behind the barn, setting things in order, cleaning what tools she had, boiling water, folding cloth the same way each time. Men came and went, a cut hand, a twisted wrist, nothing spoken beyond what was needed. They didn't thank her. They didn't have to. On the 4th morning, the sound came before the dust. Hooves, fast. More than one. Clara looked up from the basin. The water inside had gone still. Outside, voices shifted. Work slowed, then stopped. She stepped to the door and opened it just enough to see the yard. 2 riders came through the gate without slowing. One wore a coat too clean for ranch work. The other carried a badge pinned to his vest, catching the light. Sheriff Nolan Price. Clara knew the look of law when it rode in. The second man dismounted first. He removed his gloves 1 finger at a time, as if the cold didn't concern him. Clara didn't need him to speak. She knew him. Dr. Howard Bell. He hadn't changed much. Same straight posture. Same careful way of looking at a place as if it belonged to him already. He turned, and his eyes found her. For a moment, the yard narrowed to that line between them. Then it opened again. Gideon stepped out from the main house. He didn't hurry, didn't raise his voice. "What brings you out this far?" he asked. Sheriff Price swung down from his horse and brushed snow from his coat. "Got business," he said. "Won't take long." Dr. Bell stepped forward before Gideon could answer. "It concerns her," he said, nodding toward Clara. No anger in his voice. No edge. That made it worse. Clara closed the door behind her and walked out into the yard. Boots crunched underfoot. The air felt thinner now. Sheriff Price reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, sealed and stamped. "Clara Whitfield," he said, reading from it. "You're being called to answer for practicing medicine without license in this territory." The words hung there. No one moved. Clara didn't reach for the paper. She didn't deny it. Gideon stepped closer, just enough to stand beside her, not in front. "She's been tending injuries," he said. "That's the claim," the sheriff replied. Dr. Bell's gaze stayed on Clara. "You left your position under circumstances that disqualified you," he said. "That hasn't changed just because you found distance." Clara met his eyes. "I didn't find distance," she said. "I walked." A flicker passed across his face, gone as quickly as it came. Sheriff Price cleared his throat. "You'll need to come into Redstone. Hearing set for tomorrow." One of the ranch hands shifted behind them. "She saved Ethan," he said under his breath. Another voice followed. "And Tom's hand last week." The sheriff didn't look at them. "Law's the law," he said. Silence settled again. Gideon reached for the paper then, took it from the sheriff's hand and unfolded it once. His eyes moved over the lines. No reaction. He folded it back along the same crease. "We'll be there," he said. Dr. Bell smiled faintly, not with satisfaction. Something quieter. "I expected as much," he said. He turned without another word and mounted his horse. Sheriff Price lingered a moment longer. "Sun's up early," he said to Gideon. "Road'll be clear by then." Then he followed. The riders left as they came, fast, direct. The gate swung once behind them, then stilled. No one spoke. Clara stood where she was. The cold had crept back in, but it felt different now. Not outside her. Inside. Gideon didn't look at her right away. He watched the road until the riders disappeared over the rise. Then he turned. "Pack what you need," he said. Clara's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not running," she said. "I didn't ask you to," he answered. Another pause. "You said you'd take me to the station if I wanted to leave," she added. "That still stands." "And if I don't?" Gideon held her gaze. "Then we ride in the morning," he said, same as I told him. No pressure, no argument. Just a line drawn. Clara nodded once. Around them, the ranch began to mount again, slow at first, then steady. Work didn't stop. It never did. Clara turned back toward the cabin. Her steps were measured, even. Inside, the room felt smaller than it had before. She set her bag on the table and opened it. One by one, she checked the contents. Same as the first night. Same order. When she finished, she reached for the paper Gideon had left that morning. The inventory list. At the bottom, her handwriting still marked what she needed. Bandages, alcohol, thread. She stared at the words for a moment, then folded the paper and slipped it into her bag. Outside, the light shifted toward afternoon. The ridge line stood clear against the sky. Clara moved to the window and rested her hand against the frame. Tomorrow, she would ride back into the place she had left behind, not to return, to answer. And this time, she wouldn't be standing alone on a platform. She would be walking in by choice. Morning came thin and pale over Hale Ridge. Frost clung to the fence rails, and the horses stood quiet, steam rising from their backs in the cold air. Clara stepped out of the cabin with her bag in hand. Same coat. Same worn leather strap across her shoulder. Nothing about her looked different, only the way she walked. Gideon was already at the gate with 2 saddled horses. He didn't call out, just checked the cinch one more time, then stepped aside when she approached. "You ride?" he asked. "I manage," she said. He gave a small nod and steadied the stirrup without touching her. She mounted on her own, took a second to settle, then gathered the reins. They rode out without ceremony. The road back to Redstone Pass felt shorter. The snow had packed down under wagon wheels and hoof tracks, turning the path into something solid. The sky stayed clear, but the cold held. They didn't speak much. Once near the ridge, Clara's horse slipped slightly on a patch of ice. She caught it before it went too far. Gideon had already turned, watching, but didn't move in. When she straightened, he looked forward again. That was enough. By midday, the town came into view, smoke from chimneys, thin and steady. The depot roof, still half buried in snow, the same place she had left. Only now she rode in. People noticed. They always did. A few men stood outside the general store. One of them lowered his voice when he saw Gideon. Another turned his back entirely. No one stepped in their way. The courthouse sat near the center of town. A simple building. Wood walls, narrow windows. A bell hung above the door that hadn't been rung in years. Gideon dismounted first. Clara followed. He didn't reach for her, didn't guide her. He just waited until she stood steady, then walked beside her to the door. Inside, the room was already full. Ranchers, store owners, a few faces Clara recognized from the depot that night. All of them turned when she entered. The sound shifted, not louder, just different. Sheriff Nolan Price stood near the front, hat in hand. Dr. Howard Bell sat at a table to the side, papers arranged neatly before him. Clara walked past both of them without stopping. Gideon took a place near the wall. Not far, not close. The hearing began without ceremony. Sheriff Price read the charge in a flat voice. Practicing medicine without license, endangering lives. Clara stood when asked, hands at her sides. Still, Dr. Bell spoke next. Calm, precise. He laid out his version of things. Records from back east. Statements written in careful script. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he finished, the room settled into a quiet that pressed from all sides. "Anyone wish to speak?" Sheriff Price asked. For a moment, no one moved. Then a chair scraped. Ethan Cole stood. He walked forward slow, favoring the leg Clara had set days before. When he reached the front, he bent down and pulled his pant leg up just enough to show the bandage beneath. "This is her work," he said. No anger, no show, just fact. "If she hadn't done it," he went on, "I'd be laid up, or worse. That's all I've got." He stepped back. Another man followed, then another. Short words, plain words. "She fixed my hand. She stopped the bleeding. Didn't ask for anything." No speeches, just pieces of truth laid down one at a time. "Doctor." Bell watched it all without expression. When it ended, the room went quiet again. Sheriff Price looked from one side to the other, then down at the paper in his hand. "This court don't have the means to grant a full license," he said slowly. "That's beyond us." A few heads lowered. "But," he added, "no one here's claiming harm. Quite the opposite." He folded the paper once. "Under the word of this community, Miss Whitfield is permitted to continue her work within Hale Ridge and surrounding ranches, understood as necessary service. Not a victory, not a loss. Something in between." Clara nodded once. "That's understood," she said. Dr. Bell gathered his papers. For the first time, his hands paused over them. He looked at Clara. "You've made your case," he said. She didn't answer. He left it there and stood, moving past her without another word. The room began to break apart. Voices returning, boots on wood. Gideon stepped forward then. "Ready?" he asked. Clara glanced around once. At the walls, the people, the place she had walked into on her own. Then she nodded. They rode back in the late afternoon. The light had shifted warmer, cutting long shadows across the snow. The ridge came into view just as the sun dipped lower. Hale Ridge Ranch stood the same as before, only Clara didn't see it that way. She dismounted in front of the cabin. Her boots hit the ground solid. Gideon stayed on his horse. "If you want to leave," he said, "I can take you to the next train tomorrow." She looked at him. "And if I don't?" He held her gaze. "Then nothing here changes," he said. "You keep doing what you've been doing. No promise beyond that. No claim." Clara nodded once and then turned and walked inside. The room was warm, the fire already lit. She set her bag on the table, then moved to the back corner where the small space had begun to take shape. A shelf, a clean cloth laid out, a place for tools. She stood there for a moment. Then she reached for a small wooden board leaning against the wall. It had been there since the first day, unused. She carried it outside. The evening air had softened. The wind low, almost quiet. Gideon was still by the gate. Clara took a piece of charcoal from her pocket and wrote on the board. The letters came steady, even in the fading light. Whitfield Medical, open. She hung it beside the door. It swung once, then settled. Gideon watched from where he sat. He didn't move closer, didn't step in. He just stayed there, giving the space to her. Clara stood in the doorway, looking out over the yard. For the first time, nothing pulled her away. Nothing asked her to prove anything. The place didn't claim her. It didn't need to. She had chosen it, and that was enough. The wind moved softer across Hale Ridge that evening, carrying the smell of wood smoke and the faint sound of horses settling in for the night. Nothing grand had changed. No crowd had gathered. No one marked the moment but them. Gideon stayed by the gate a while longer, the way a man does when he's learned not to step into something that isn't his to take. And Clara stood in her doorway, not waiting to be asked, not needing to be saved, just standing where she meant to be. Some stories don't end with a promise spoken out loud. Some don't need it. What they built wasn't loud. It didn't ask for attention. It showed itself in small things: steady hands, quiet trust, a door left open, and a place made ready for someone to stay. Maybe that's what matters most. Not who reaches for you in the storm, but who lets you stand on your own feet when it's over. And maybe love, the kind that lasts, isn't about holding on tight. It's about knowing when to step back and still be there. If you had been in Clara's place, would you have stayed or taken the next train out? And if this story found its way to you tonight, there are more like it waiting. Stories about second chances, quiet courage, and the kind of bonds that don't need to be named to be real. You're always welcome to come back and listen.